Welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to resilience, business continuity, disasters, COVID, anything that can help you, your organization, or your community prepare for, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, please feel free. You can find me on LinkedIn. I am the only Alex Fullick there. I'm really easy to find, and I do respond to everything I get. Today is actually overdue by about 3 months because we've had so many different things happen on both ends of the schedule, but I'm really happy to welcome back Regina Phelps. Regina, welcome back.
Alex, 3 months, that went by so quickly, but yes, we've had a tough scheduling problem the last 90 days, haven't we?
We have. It's because there's so many things going on in the world, and
so many
we're
things.
going to touch on some of that today.
We are.
But you've been well?
I've been well. And you?
Yes. Well, busy. Well, yes.
As well as can be expected, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I totally understand that one. Yeah, so I have a deck of slides, and I think we're just going to go through and talk about the crystal ball of the future here. How's that?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, let me jump in. I'm going to show my deck here, and we'll get started. So, yeah, just what we want to be talking about. But I think this is really the issue that's at hand for all of us in our field, and that's really the sense of global instability. And of course, I don't need to remind anybody who's in our business, anybody in the world, frankly, of what's going on. There's a lot happening, and this instability is really creating such difficulty in so many organizations. And the question really is for all of our professional colleagues is, is your program really ready to meet the moment? And that's really what I want to talk about today. And we'll focus a little bit on some definitions as we historically have done, but we're also going to talk a little bit about executives. I've never seen executives so interested in this work ever. It's quite remarkable, actually. So I'm going to talk briefly just for a second about the vocabulary of the moment. Some of these words will be familiar to you if you've heard Alex and I talk before. If not, this will be a review. And then the question of has this happened before? And of course, the answer is going to be yes. I want to spend some time really talking about executives and their use of the word resilience and the drumbeat about that I see in my clients in the executive suite. And then lastly, I'm going to give you a homework assignment because, of course, I can. And that's what I always do because I want you to think about what you're going to do with all this stuff that Alex and I talk about. So I want to talk about the vocabulary of the moment. I have been talking a lot about this year. I've been given, 7 or 8 speeches. I've written quite a few articles and many publications. And this is something I think that really is important for us to stop and reflect on because it really, and I know you and Alex and I have talked about this several times, this really is reflective of where we are in the universe right now between the end of the pandemic and all of the other things happening. And oh my God, how many things are going on in the world? It's just mind-boggling. So the first word I want to talk about is polycrisis, of course, and that's one that I've been talking a lot about. I didn't invent this word. I think it's a very cool word, and it really speaks to the moment that we're in. And essentially, it was originally coined by a French philosopher, Edgar Morin, and that was in the 90s. But all of a sudden, in 2023, it got a brand new life when Adam Tooze, who's a well-known economic historian, attended Davos at the World Economic Forum, and he started talking about this concept of the polycrisis, and it just took off. And all of a sudden, that was a word that was the most searched word for days on Google. And people were wondering, what is this? But yet we kind of have a sense of what it means just by simply the design of the word. And I think it's actually the best word to describe the pressure cooker moment that the globe is in. Because really what it does is it talks about this concept that all of these crises that are going on are all essentially interconnected in some way. And they're intertwined with each other and they're all kind of tangled up and they basically make each other worse. And I don't know about you, Alex, but I certainly feel that just personally as I see these crises going on all over the world. And it does feel like everything is connected to each other, right?
Yeah, well, the globe is, they said that we've never been closer than we are right now. So with social media and with the internet and things like that,
Right.
so we
Right.
can reach out across the globe in seconds. So when
Right.
something happens somewhere, even if you don't feel the immediate impact, you're already feeling it in your heart or
Mm-hmm.
your
Mm-hmm.
emotions when you see
Mm-hmm.
something occurring. And
Mm-hmm.
you probably know somebody
Right.
who has a relative or a work colleague or somebody who's
Mm-hmm.
related to that event that's in that place of the world, whether it be
Right.
the Southeast Asia where things are occurring in India or Russia or somewhere in Europe. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is so true. And I think when you also look at the business world and you look at all the different locations that companies have and all the different impacts of the supply chain, and then you file in all of this human loss and suffering, it really is significant. And I think what happens when you look at this polycrisis is that we really look at this cluster of all of these global risks. And essentially, what happens is they begin to compound each other. And you certainly saw that with the pandemic immediately and the impact around the world that that had. But then also when you think about things like the Ukraine war and how that displacement of so many over, was it 10 million Ukrainians left the country and they then went across the world. And so we had this increase of migrants on top of all the other migrants that are moving. And then the impact of the grain loss and the famine that's occurring in Africa right now. And that causes migration. And all of these things begin to create other crises, starting with one particular incident that then begins to cascade, intertwine, cluster, grow, group, etc. And we're certainly seeing that all over the world with all of the different issues that we're facing, which is really challenging. And I
it,
think when you stop and think about that, I mean, just look at just this one little slide, just talks about just some of the things that we have seen and experienced. And I think you and I were talking before we started, is that I was saying to you that, I feel that in my 40 years of practice, I have never worked with so many clients who are frazzled, beyond frazzled, under a lot of pressure. And I think also feeling fragile, maybe isolated. There is just a lot of strain that I see in the people that I'm working with and all the companies that I work with worldwide. And I feel it myself.
yeah,
Are you seeing that same kind of thing, Alex?
yes, I am. I feel it myself every time I turn the news on or
Mm-hmm.
on the train or something. You can see people just it's almost like you can feel the stress.
Right. It's
Sometimes you can
palpable,
walk
isn't it?
into
It's
yeah,
actually palpable.
you can walk into a room and that the vibe in here is not good. You know, you
Mm-hmm.
it's like that when you're around
Right.
all these different people. They're starting to be a little bit suspicious of each other, or
Mm-hmm.
they're not intermingling like they used to, or that they were hoping to when
Mm-hmm.
they started to go back to the office. And I get to see all my colleagues again. Well, no, with all these different events going around the world, people are splintering off and
Right.
becoming wary of each other. It's like I don't think people really know how to turn or where to turn.
Right. I think also too, because of the pandemic and because of the isolation that many people felt, I think also we have all of these pressures, as you just aptly described, that can create tensions between groups. But then also, I think we just don't have the social skills that we had, in 2019, right? I mean, it's a different world, and I think you couple that within all of these incredible stresses around the world and all of these really extreme groups growing in strength. Looking at the Argentine election that just happened, and you look at what happened in the Netherlands, and you look at the riots in Dublin, and all of those things begin to cascade and build to each other, and it begins to make me certainly feel like, oh my God, what is going on? And it weighs on me.
Yeah,
It weighs on me.
yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. That's exactly how I feel on this end.
Mm-hmm.
When you were describing, events around the world, I had this vision of a bucket of water and just putting one drop in there, that one little event, and it ripples out.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's a great metaphor. And I think for those of us, so you put all of that in a hopper, and then you think about what all of us do for a living, right? So, my job every day is I talk to, counsel, support, exercise, train, plan, etc., crisis management teams all over the world. And some days I just feel like I need to go lay down and put my head down on the pillow and just like, I need to, I need to like plant flowers in the backyard or something. I need to do something that is so less stressful than actually dealing with all those issues. And I think my clients are really feeling all of that. And I sense a lot of increased pressure, a lot of increased responsibility. Whether that's real or not, I don't know. But boy, I do see it in people's behavior and their performance, lots of things. And, I just really always ask all of us in our profession, stop, take a deep breath, unplug when you can, because you don't have to be collected and unplugged into the universe every single second of every single day. And sometimes you just need whatever that is, a little news break, a little step away from, being connected to dealing either with work or whatever it might be in your life, because we need to take care of ourselves so that we're in one piece, when the next kind of big shoe drops that we have to actually respond to.
I think that's also a part of reason why people don't unplug. It's because there are so many things going on in the world. If I unplug, I'm going to miss something.
Right.
And I don't mean, the latest version of a video game or something. I mean, an event in the world that I may need to respond to or know about or take back to the office, because there is so much going on. And so people aren't unplugging for that reason.
Right. And I think, to that end, there are ways that you can do that. It may take a little bit more design, like having certain alerts on your phone or device, really working if you have a global security operations center and making sure that they're pinging you appropriately as well, so that you're not feeling the sole responsibility that you're the one that has to be tracking all of that stuff. But I totally hear you, especially for companies with many locations around the world. It's really hard to feel like you can unplug, but at the same time, if you don't, and this is, I think, an important thing for us to keep in mind, is that what I see, you can kind of see in people's eyes and in their face how the burnout begins to start, and they just begin to sort of hollow out inside. And I see that in a lot of my clients now, and it's kind of heartbreaking. I was on a call with some people this morning, and I just looked at all of them. I just felt like, oh my God.
Yeah. Long drawn faces, just like, oh.
Right. It's just, yeah. It's just awful. So I think this is important for us to talk about, but at the end, I also want to circle back to this issue of taking care of yourself, because if we're not standing, then, there's really no point in any of this personally, right? We have to be standing at the end of the story.
Yes.
So the question that people always ask me, okay, so is this unusual or whatever? And has this ever happened before? And of course, as anybody's heard me talk in the last couple of years, I've been talking a lot about the impacts of pandemics. And this is really an example of that. This is the 14th century plague. And this is a quote that you could cross out a few lines, honey, and you could make it right now. European society after the 14th century plague was highly strung, on edge, and quick to violence. So fierce and clamorous was life, that you could endure the mingled odor of blood and roses. That's pretty graphic. That's from an historian, actually a Dutch historian, 1919. But I think I want to give people some, I don't know if this is comfort or not, but it explains a little bit also about where we are, and it has to do with the pandemic. And this is actually a really important part of what we'll talk about today, because this is sadly very predictable. And I'm embarrassed, and I know I've talked with you about this before. I'm embarrassed. I've done pandemic planning since 1997, but I never looked at the historical impacts of what happens, quote, when it's over. But when I was asked to do that in 2022 by a client of mine, I went through a large number of historical medical documents and books and read lots of histories. And my God, there are just reoccurring things that happen over and over and over and over after every pandemic. So this is either comforting or it's like, oh my God, I don't know which, but this is what happens, unfortunately. And there's quite a list of things. And this will sound like today. I mean, distrust of government and public health measures. So I don't know about Canada, because I know you're so nice. But here in the United States, people don't trust the government at any level, often, it seems. So whether it's the local municipalities or all the way up to the national government. And certainly there's many people that don't trust public health. And we certainly saw that in this pandemic with vaccine, anti-vax growth, right? And vaccine pushback and not wearing masks. But this has happened in basically going back to what the farthest I went back was 432 BC for a plague pandemic started in Athens. This is what happens. People are suspicious of the government. They resist any mandate. They don't like being told what to do. They don't like being told that they have to do things to slow the spread. They don't want to distance. They don't want to wear masks. That goes back to the 16th century when masks were first started to be used by doctors. And then vaccine resistance actually started in 1770 with George Washington when they came up with a pretty innovative but very crude smallpox vaccine where they realized, oh my gosh, and this was just by happenstance that they figured this out, that if somebody had an injury or a scrape and they actually touched somebody who had smallpox and they got a little bit of that vesicle in their bloodstream, they actually were, quote, vaccinated. And actually it worked. I saw George Washington's troops did not die of smallpox in the revolution in the United States in the 1770s, which is really weird, but true. So are people suspicious of government in Canada? You guys are so nice. That'd be hard to believe, but maybe.
Oh, no, it's the same.
Is it the same?
Everything that happens in the U.S. seeps its way up here.
I'm so sorry.
Always. Good things happen in the U.S., good things happen up here. Bad things happen in the U.S., bad things seep and find their way up here. The same thing occurs because we're so intertwined, through social media, through our companies, our stores.
Our close borders, right? People jumping back and forth, right?
Yep.
That are in that area.
And we work, in each other's country. We're biggest trading partners of each. So, what happens in one ends up finding its way into the other all the time.
Yep. Yeah, this is something that we'll have for a very long time. I pray that we don't have another pandemic in the near future because all of this would just make that 100 times worse.
Yeah. Agreed.
Another one that's really big is blame. We like to blame people. And so we blame all kinds of groups. And you're seeing that a lot now also with immigration, where people are blaming immigrants for things. It's the same thing. So what you start having is this reinforcement of this particular issue of blame. There's been often in many pandemics a tie back to China, which has been interesting. Even if the disease didn't come from there, they were often blamed. And it has always been an excuse for anti-Semitism, which now sort of feeding into this whole war in Israel and Hamas and other things just makes it even more, just prescient, right? I mean, it's quite amazing. But the blame is a big issue. And I thought about that a lot, actually, when I saw the riots that occurred in Dublin. I guess it was Thursday last week. And it was all based on pretty much anti-immigrant riots.
And it was, correct me if I'm wrong, was that the situation where it was all started because of disinformation? Yep.
And it was actually disinformation. But then what was interesting is that the accounts that I read said that people were so excited about the event, the riot going on, the fires and all of that stuff, they couldn't get people to disband because everybody wanted to just fed each other. They just fed each other on their anger, which is really, oh my gosh, heartbreaking.
Yeah, scary.
It's really scary. Another one, this gets to the third one, which is fraying of society. Widespread crime. We've had huge increases in crime in the United States, all kinds of opportunistic crimes in particular. Political losses. I mean, look at what's going on right now with the far right making great strides in Europe, South America, in Africa, the coups going on, really fueled by Russia in particular, and which really moves towards this populism and this autocratic state of government, and where people are saying things are bad, only I can save you. I mean, that's just like should scare you to death when you hear some leader talking like that. But that's very common, and you've heard some autocratic leaders, some United States autocratic leaders saying those kinds of things. And then it results in a lot of incredible bad behavior, which we've had tons of and the riots in Dublin are just a really good example of that. We'll talk about two more and then maybe or one more, and we'll maybe then take a short break. You want to do that?
Sure.
The fourth one, this cracks me up because this goes back, remember, 432 BC, conspiratorial theories and apocalyptic thinking. So the conspiracy theories, oh my gosh, there's a zillion of them about the pandemic, and there's a zillion about almost everything that you see right now globally. So those feed each other, and those are hugely problematic, but there are people making up all kinds of really bizarre things, but they take off, which always, I mean, like the QAnon thing in the United States, it's like, wow, but they take off. And then that also really feeds to this apocalyptic thinking where you'll have some religious groups who might be saying, oh, the end is nigh, and you need to repent or whatever. And that's hugely been influencing behavior around the world as well. And then lastly, this is probably the only good thing I could say that happened out of the five, has been the rise of the worker. And you certainly have seen that in the United States. I don't know about in Canada, but we've had a huge increase in union drives that have been successful in really the opportunity for workers to really stand up and get higher wages and be able to get better benefits. And that, I think, from all of us, is a more positive thing, that people are being better compensated for their labor. And I think that's been that's one of the positive things that generally comes out of a pandemic, that workers do actually begin to organize, and they're effective in that effort.
Yeah, conspiracy theories. The very first one I ever heard was back in 1978, beginning of 1978. Elvis was still alive and was seen at a Burger King.
Right? Or how about when they thought that the moon landing was actually shot in a movie studio, and then a bunch of other those. I used to hear those and I think like, what? Yep. Are you kidding? Yeah, but now they're very common. Oh my gosh, they're everywhere.
Used to laugh at that one, but now there's just so many. Everything can be made into a conspiracy theory these days.
Right? Who knew? Right? Who knew?
And you mentioned if with the rise of the workers, I think you were referring to the auto workers unions, especially.
Sure.
The big three. And yes, the same thing happened here. The thing is, we didn't have the big strikes that they had in the U.S. Because I think the Canadian workers or union or whoever was involved kind of knew that, where we are, we can't shut down. So they tended to have the agreements in place a little sooner and had less impact. And what impact they did have actually came from what was happening in the US rather than their own actions here in Canada. But they did get all that fixed up here.
That's great. I'm glad to see it. I think that's been a big plus.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It has, and I'm seeing it now in restaurants as well. Big push for unionized workers or higher pay or get rid of tipping so that you have to pay a living wage to a server or a bartender now.
Right. Which I think, all of that I think is really smart and makes sense to me. Because why should people live on modest amounts of income when, especially the people that own the businesses or run the corporations, have incredibly large salaries, at least here in the United States. I am assuming that's probably the same in Canada.
Yeah. And it doesn't help when you hear so-and-so CEO, she gets, 20 million bonus because she fired, 1,000 employees or something like that. Like,
right.
Wait, what? You're putting 1,000 families or homes through hell over the next few months because they've lost their jobs and you're getting $20 million for that. Right. So, people are starting to push back on that.
As they should.
Yeah.
As they should.
On that note, we've come to the end of our first segment. We are talking with Regina Phelps, and we will be right back. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.